And we welcome back to the Morning Magazine David Stokes with the Show Me Institute in St. Louis. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm doing great, Manny. Great to be with you and your listeners.
This week, my friend, we are talking about something that, I don't know if I've ever discussed it before. Maybe you haven't either. I've talked about horses before and horse rescue and horse riding lessons and things like that. Even the horse track, I think I've talked about before, but never have I discussed horse slaughter plants. But that's exactly what we're going to take up here this morning on this week's Show Me at the Lake. What is the situation right now with the one plant? I believe it's going to be near Gallatin. It looks like that plant may or may not happen. Is that correct, David?
Well, it's to be determined. The Department of Agriculture recently approved their first horse slaughterhouse in America in the last 6 or 7 years, and that's in New Mexico. Appropriately enough, I think it's in Roswell, New Mexico. So if you're going to do something weird like a horse slaughterhouse, I guess it should be in Roswell, New Mexico.
Yeah, I guess.
but they've been proposed for several others around the country, and with the one in New Mexico being approved, I think there's certainly a good chance the one in Gallatin, Missouri, outside of Kansas City, might be approved, and others have been proposed for areas even closer to the Ozarks, such as Rockville, Missouri, and it doesn't look like that one's going to happen. But if they start getting approved, who knows? That proposal could come back.
How rare is this? I mean, you mentioned that there's just one plant right now in New Mexico. Just how rare is this in the United States that you talk about the slaughter of horses?
Well, it's extremely rare. That one plant in New Mexico isn't even operating yet. It's just been approved to begin operations at some point in the future. So we don't have any legally operating horse slaughterhouses in the country right now, and it's a big philosophical question as to whether they should be allowed or not. They are legal. Congress made it illegal several years ago by removing all the funding for inspectors, but they've placed some of that money back in. But there's continuing efforts to eliminate it once and for all, and it's certainly the question that the average American is going to react with a shudder towards. But I think it's an open question whether or not our dislike for the thought of it and the fact that there is no American market for horse meat, nobody in America eats horses. I would never eat a horse. But it's an open question whether that a preference by Americans should result in an absolute ban on horse slaughter and sale of the meat to other places around the world where people do eat horses.
Well, you mentioned that in this country there literally is no market for it. All of the meat that would be taken into these slaughterhouses, if they do come online, all of that, I think primarily that would all be headed to Europe. Is that correct?
That what I've read in some interesting articles in some of the Ozark online newspapers, and the Springfield News Leader has covered the issue pretty closely. That yes, it's all in Europe. There is a market for horse meat, and there's no stigma attached to it, to quote one of the articles. And it's very interesting that it's a very fair question, and I don't have the answer, Manny. I wish I did, but whether or not our preferences in America should be codified into law. And I don't necessarily think that they should. Just because we would never do it here, it does not automatically follow that we should thereby ban the practice and prevent the potential for a few jobs. I don't think anybody's saying this would be a huge economic development, but it could produce a few jobs and put to use. Nothing beneficial happens from these horses when they just die and move on. I mean, the idea that, if you could produce some jobs and sell it and raise some capital for rural Missouri in this industry, I think that would be a good thing, as distasteful as it might sound.
Well, I do know, if we flip the clock back here to when the economy started to fall apart, do you go back to 2006, 2007, there was a lot of talk of trying to get horse slaughter plants up and running again as a way to help with the economy, because there were so many horses that were just let go because people couldn't take care of them anymore, and they were just wandering around, and they were wanting to round these horses up and to slaughter them again humanely and then to sell the meat overseas. but that really kind of fell on deaf ears, and as a result, you still have hundreds, if not thousands, of horses that are out there that are not being taken care of, and still, I think you have these horses that are just kind of being turned loose and set free.
Well, Manny, you put it very well there. I mean, that is the problem. There is a problem with abandoned and uncared for horses, and that problem doesn't go away and probably gets even worse when you eliminate the slaughter of horses for food, for sale, primarily, again, overseas. I don't like the idea of this. As I said, I'd never eat a horse. I love horses. My family used to own one of the downtown St. Louis horse and carriage companies that, people, when they go to downtown St. Louis, they ride in those carriages, and we used to be part owners of one of those. So I've ridden horses many times. I've worked as a stable boy for a couple summers back when I was a teenager. So I love horses, but I still don't see any real legitimate reason to ban the use of them for meat for people who might desire to eat that. I just can't see an argument for what good comes from that, as much as the average American would find it distasteful, as I said. No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking with David Stokes from the Show Me Institute here on this week's edition of Show Me at the Lake on the Morning Magazine on News Talk 1150 97.5 KRMS. Another group is stepping in here to try to stop these horse slaughter plants from being open in the state of Missouri, and especially those of our listeners that are familiar with some of the things that happened a few years ago with this organization. It's maybe not a huge surprise, but the Humane Society of the United States may go into court to try to block some of these horse slaughter plants. And that would be an interesting, is that, I guess, a surprising move from the Humane Society, do you think, David?
No, it's not at all. This is the same organization that passed the legislation. Put the legislation on the ballot, which was then passed by Missouri voters to ban puppy mills in the state. And this is an organization which is not affiliated with your local Humane Society that people generally have such fond feelings towards. There's local Humane Societies that do amazing work around the country. This is a national organization that shares the same name, but it has a much more sort of radical pro-animal rights activist record. And there's probably lots of people around Missouri who agree with them on many of these things, but this is not your local Humane Society trying to do this. This is an animal rights activist organization.
The other interesting note is I was doing some research for our talk today is that the state of Missouri does have support for this idea with one of our state senators, or one of our federal senators, rather, as U.S. Senator Roy Blunt supports the idea of opening a horse slaughter plant in the state of Missouri.
Well, and I would agree with the senator, and I think there's probably lots of state reps and state senators who would finally, in the end, come down on the idea that it's not nice, but leaving horses to starve to death and be uncared for is just as cruel. And if there's some way that you can take these uncared for horses and humanely slaughter them and sell the meat and create some jobs and create some economic activity, and I would never want to sound like that anybody's going to promise the moon here. I mean, would always be a very small industry and create a small number of jobs. But you know what? A small number of jobs is still enough to support some families. And I think that the benefits would be good, particularly for those people who all of a sudden are working because of this industry. And look, I know there's lots of local people around the state who, if they hear this plant is coming to Gallatin or Rockville, are going to be really offended at that thought, and I understand that. And, any of these plants would have to go through a local permitting procedure, which I think for health reasons and health department reasons in those counties is fine. But I think in the end, it's just the type of thing that nobody likes it, but it probably should be allowed. We can't ban everything we don't like in the United States of America. There's plenty of people who have a political philosophy that if something is untoward, then it should be banned. My view is that these are separate things. Government action is not always called on to make something illegal just because people don't think it's proper.
Well, and it's one of these things too that if you look at some of the arguments against horse slaughtering, you see a lot of references to the notion that this would open Pandora's box to other animal slaughterhouses in this country, besides what we already have now, primarily poultry and, beef and pork, as, for example, that, it would extend to other animals. But I don't really see anything from the horse slaughter industry that would indicate that's what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think this aim from the horse slaughter industry is very limited. And again, these things are going to happen where there's a market to eat the meat. Nobody in America is going to eat horses. Nobody in America is going to eat dog. Just because this happens in a few places around the country does not mean that all of a sudden we're going to be processing dog to be shipped around the world. I think that's already illegal, and that would almost certainly stay illegal, because as much as the majority of Americans are against horse slaughterhouses, I think every American would be against adding in our household pets. So these are different things, and it just strikes me as strange that for some reason cows and pigs and other animals are treated one way, but horses are treated totally differently. And I don't think that just because we raise horses differently in the United States and don't think of them as food is justification for the government making it illegal. If there's no market for it in the United States, then the result will be there'll never be more than a couple of these facilities around the country, and it's never really going to be all that big of a deal, except that we do have tens of thousands of uncared for horses who are a problem whether we allow slaughterhouses or not.
And again, it looks like right now that one plant in Gallatin has put the paperwork into the USDA. The other plant doesn't look like they're that far along. Any indication from anything you've heard where they're at, other than the application's been sent off? But that's, I guess that's all the information I have right now as well.
Well, it's still a long process, particularly for Gallatin. They have to get local approvals and federal approvals. And as we said, the one plant in New Mexico has gotten the federal approval and presumably local approval as well, although I don't know that for sure. But they're still not operating. They still have to – all they have is the preliminary federal approval. They still have to go through further hoops. And it should be a regulated process. Nobody's going to stand here and argue that you should just be able to open one of these slaughterhouses and just begin. This is one area where I think significant regulation is fully justified. It should be a tough process, and it's going to take a while. And I think in Gallatin, the local people, if they really don't want it, will have an opportunity to try and stop it through zoning or permitting or whatever those procedures are. I oftentimes don't agree with those procedures, but for something like a horse slaughterhouse, I think the route it will have to take is appropriate.
David Stokes with the Show Me Institute, thank you so much for the time, sir. And on this week's Show Me at the Lake, we'll visit again next Thursday. Again, please give us the website for the Show Me Institute and your contact information if folks have more questions or they'd like some more information about the Show Me Institute.
Well, Manny, I always enjoy talking to you on Thursdays and engaging with your listeners here. And you can find everything Show Me Institute writes at showmeinstitute.org. Our blog is showmedaily.org, and your listeners can follow me on Twitter at David C. Stokes.
David, thank you so much again. We'll visit next week on another edition of Show Me at the Lake.
Thanks, Manny.
David Stokes with the Show Me Institute is this week's page number 2 guest here on News Talk 1150 and 97.5 KRMS.